All right, now we're moving on to some lore videos. Something I haven't done yet because this pirate software and the Ukrainian war and then the Hassan H3H3 and grifters and all that was more interesting for me at the time. But now I'm going to watch a Netheril video. This is going to be a long one. But this is my favorite fiction out of everything. Netheril, D&D, Faerun, VTUBER. You gotta love it. Like, D&D's lore is staggering. What they've done with it. Mainly what Ed Greenwood did with it. Gary Gygax created the universe and created the concepts, and then Ed Greenwood was like, here, George R. Martin level designs here.
It was once the most powerful and influential magical empire in the history of Faerun. Rising from humble beginnings as a collection of villages, Netheril grew to dominate.
They were fishing villages, and they ended up finding the golden scales of the world serpent, which later became named the Netheril Scrolls. Or the Scrolls of Netheril. It's one of two, but most people just state either or. The point is, they were the golden scales of the world serpent. They were a set of scrolls that I believe were created way back before the elves even existed by a ancient nation, and they were one of the first civilizations on Faerun. Even before the giants, even before the dragons, they were one of the first civilizations. They created these scrolls, and then they sealed them away. And eventually their civilization fell. After that, you get the elves. They find the scrolls, start utilizing the 10th level magic. Then the elves start to realize this is dangerous if this gets out. So then they seal it away. And then the Netherese people, this is before they were the Netherese. A specific person, it'll probably mention the name in this video, but he found the scrolls because a lich like from the previous civilization that was a lich found this guy, told him where to find the scrolls. He collected them, and that started the Netherese Society.
Not just the land, but the very fabric of magic itself. Its arcanists wielded unprecedented power.
Let me tell you how OP an arcanist was in Netheril Society. They were so broken, they used the Deck of Many Things as a card game to play in their spare time. They took the original creator, the original deck, which was found, belonging to the Goddess of Fate, and then took it, and they made dumbed down versions of it that were equally, or if not close to as powerful, and anytime they wanted to just chill and play a game with one another, the Arcanists would play with the Deck of Many Things in their spare time. Cards that literally use the 9th level Wish spell and do fate spells, granting legendary weapons, and one card in there specifically which is more powerful than even Wish, capable of altering the fate of a single thing in all of creation. And the Arcanists of the Netheril Society were like, Uno. It's crazy to me that that's what they did with their free time. That was what they did. Deck of Many Things. Oh boy.
And its floating cities were wonders of the world. Yet, like all great empires, Netheril was doomed to fall, its glory consumed by hubris and the dangers of tampering with forces beyond their control.
Well, it was due to one individual. Like, it was a series of events. The first and most obvious event is the fact that the Netherese started to enslave the gnomes and a few other races. And they treat them like experiments. They treat them and did experiments on them. It's how some gnomes end up born with the arcane. That's why they specialize in illusion magic. The things the Netheries did that led to their downfall, first was the most obvious. They messed with 10th level magic and beyond. Second was the creation of a very unique device that gave their cities the ability to perpetually float in the sky, as well as power all their magical items, their magical needs, because it literally tore into the weave and pulled raw magic out of it and turned it into power. It was a giant gold spinny thing. I always forget its name. It's an artifact. It's one of my favorite artifacts. The Mythalar. The Mythalar. There we go. The Mythalar. I was trying to remember. The Mythalar is what it's called. It's one of my favorite artifacts in all of D&D, if not my favorite, because it did that. The other reason Netheril fell wasn't due to Arcanist's ego and Arcanist being so just stubborn about everything, believing that they were all powerful and that the guys were just simply really powerful wizards. It's not that. It was because they were eating the weave, like they were devouring it. And on top of the fact that they were responsible for why an ancient race came out from underground and started feeding on magic. It's more of an irony than it is them bringing it on themselves, because the fact that they were eating into the weave with the Mythalar, and every time they did that, they were damaging the weave. Mistral, the first goddess of magic, had to constantly keep repairing it. She dedicated a portion of her own consciousness to constantly maintaining the weave, because they were literally siphoning it through the Mythalar. Oh man, I always pronounce it like that. The Mythalar. Come on. And because they do that, this is the reason why I believe they fell. They damaged the weave far too much. Karsus was just the final straw that broke the camel's back, because he decided to usurp her, and in that single moment of using the Karsus' avatar spell to take her, the first and only 12th level spell, she had to kill herself. And that's when Karsus realized he had made a mistake, because he didn't know that Mistral was maintaining the weave constantly, because of the damage Netheril was doing to it due to the Mythalar. The Mythalar was, to me, the key reason why they fell, mostly, because that device was damaging the weave constantly, forcing Mistral to constantly maintain it. Oh, and fun fact, when Mistra, Midnight, and Mistral all recombined to create the current goddess of magic, which is Mistra, the one that we see in Baldur's Gate 3, she was told by Ao, the overseer god of the entire Faerun crystal sphere, literally told her to take her power and transfer it between 10 chosen. Didn't tell her why, didn't explain to her why. He just said, take 10 humans. She's the only goddess of the greater deities that does this. All the rest have 1 or 2. She has 10. 10 chosen with a piece of her and the weave inside of them. Not to prevent a potential catastrophe if she gets killed again, though it is a good buffer to have in place. No, it was specifically because of one reason. Because Ao was actually afraid of Mistra. That's the conclusion I draw. Because he ordered her to do that. Because he was worried if she concentrated all that power into her, she would quite literally usurp him. And the thing is, Mistra has no intentions for that. She's not interested in that. She just likes magic. And she especially likes creatures from the Fae. Pixies. Evil little suckers.
This is the story of Netheril, the rise and fall of a magical empire, the discovery of ancient lore, the forging of powerful alliances,
Here's my problem with Netheril. My other issue. Kids being raised up there, how do they not fall off the edge? You know how clumsy and how they don't pay attention to what's going on in front of them. How do they not fall off the edge? I feel like a real picture of Netheril cities, there'd probably be a giant wall around the outer edge, just for children's safety. There's no way they don't, unless they have levitation magic that's set on the sides, preventing them from falling to their deaths.
And the eventual descent into shadows. From its founding to its diaspora, Netheril's legacy continues to shape the realms today, with its history offering lessons of both brilliance and caution. Let's journey back to the beginning, to the age when villages first banded together in defense.
Fishing villages.
And a new era was born from the knowledge of the elves and the ambition of men.
Just to be clear, the golden scales of the world serpent is what they were called first. Then they were found by the elves. The elves then sealed them away when they realized, oh, this shit is very dangerous. We shouldn't get ourselves too locked up into it. They did not create the scrolls. A lot of people think that. That's not the case. The scrolls were created by a race that came before every other race, giants, dragons, and elves. They were a lizard race of lizard reptilian people, and they created it. It was the fact that a lich that was a former member of that race was the one who led the humans to the golden scales of the world serpent.
Chapter 1. The First Stage. Long before the soaring cities and unimaginable magical feats that would come to define Netheril, the land was a patchwork of small, independent villages scattered across the northern plains.
Yep, and humans were under constant threat from orc invasions, because the orcs at this time didn't know how to self-sustain themselves, so in order to survive, they would invade human settlements and the elven settlements and take what they wanted. The one thing Grush, whatever, the orc god, who always battled with always battled with Corillin, the elven god, he never took the time to give his orc people the ability to be self-sufficient, self-sustaining. Like, I mean, come on, man. It's just so simple. You're a god. How do you not do that?
These villages were isolated, each struggling to survive in a harsh and unforgiving world. The landscape was dangerous, filled with raiders and monstrous threats lurking in the wilderness. But despite these challenges, the people of these villages were hardy and determined, eking out an existence against great odds. As the years passed, the villages grew tired of living in constant fear of attack. Orcish raiders from the spine of the world mountains would frequently sweep down, pillaging their meager resources, while goblins and bandits harassed them from the forests. Recognizing that survival was impossible in isolation, the villages began to form alliances for mutual protection. The most significant of these alliances was Seventon, named after the 7 largest settlements that took the lead in coordinating this mutual defense. This cooperative effort marked a turning point in the history of the region. For the first time, these independent communities began to see themselves as part of a larger whole, united by the need to protect one another. Over time, the bonds of necessity grew into the early seeds of what would become a unified culture. However, while they might have been protected themselves from the threats of the raiders and the marauding monsters, the true transformation of these villages was yet to come, and it would come from a completely unexpected source: the elves. In -3830 DR, the first contact between the elves and the humans of the region was made. The elves had long lived in the forests and valleys.
To be clear, this wasn't the first contact. They had prior contact, but not in large groups. It was single individuals who would occasionally come across an elf, because even then half-elves existed. This is the first large gathering that we're aware of historically.
Valleys of Faerun, hidden away from the eyes of most humans. These elder beings, steeped in ancient wisdom and magical knowledge, had little reason to concern themselves with human affairs. However,
Not gonna lie, that dude looks like his nose is super shifted this way.
over time, they began to notice the growing potential of these humans. Curious.
It's not the potential of the humans that they took advantage of. The elves took advantage of the humans because of their insane numbers, their ability to reproduce. Elves struggled. Like full-blooded elves struggle to reproduce because they don't have a high mating drive. But humans don't. It's not even comparable. Like horny monsters.
And cautious, they initiated trade with the villagers of Seventon, exchanging goods and resources. It was through these exchanges that the elves began to share more than just material. They began to share their knowledge of magic, or as they called it, the art. The humans who became the powerful Netherese started as workers for the elves, and the elves gave this little bit of magic to help them do this job, and that little bit of magic to help them do that job. The sharing of magic was a watershed moment in history. Before this, the concept of weaving magic into reality was almost entirely foreign to humans. The elves, who had mastered the manipulation of the weave, recognized the potential for humans to learn this skill as well. It was an act of generosity, and perhaps for some elves, a test of humanity's capacity to handle such power. The first human to successfully learn and harness this newfound knowledge was Therion of Gurs, a humble scholar from one of the Seventon villages. He became the first human arcanist, a pioneer of magical study. Therion's mastery of magic inspired awe amongst his people. Under his tutelage, others began to follow in his footsteps, and soon, magic spread throughout the village like wildfire. The ability to control the forces of magic marked the beginning of a dramatic shift in the balance of power in the region. The humans of Seventon, now more confident and ambitious, began to envision a future where they could rise beyond their humble beginnings. As with all great changes, this newfound power came with consequences. While the elves had hoped that sharing magic would lead to greater cooperation between their people and the humans, the opposite began to occur. As the humans of Seventon grew stronger through their mastery of magic, they became more assertive, expanding their influence and consolidating power. This power was not just used for defense, it became a tool of conquest and domination. The Rock Gnomes, a peaceful, industrious race that had lived in small enclaves near the Seventon villages for centuries. As the humans' magical abilities grew, they saw the gnomes as not allies, but as a resource to be exploited. Using their newfound arcane abilities, the Netherese began to enslave the gnomes, forcing them into labor to help build their settlements and support their burgeoning magical society. The gnomes, powerless to resist the might of human magic, were subjugated, marking the first of many acts that would strain the moral fabric of Netheril. As the humans of Seventon expanded their influence and resources, they also faced external threats. The orcs, from the spine of the world, remained a persistent danger, raiding the villages.
Yeah, the orcs could reproduce just as fast as humans. The only difference was they were much physically stronger.
And destroying whatever they could not take. In response to these raids, the humans called upon their elven allies, the elves of Illifarn and Airlan, powerful kingdoms in their own right. They came to the aid of the Seventon Alliance, driving back the orcish hordes in a series of brutal conflicts. The battles forged a strong, though increasingly uneasy, alliance between the humans and the elves. These early conflicts served as a crucible, tempering the humans of Netheril into a force that could no longer be ignored. The alliance with the elves, combined with the newfound mastery of magic, gave the humans the confidence to look beyond mere survival. For the first time, they could envision the creation of a grand civilization, one built on the foundations of magic and cooperation. Yet, even in these early days, the seeds of Netheril's eventual downfall were being sown. Until this time, elves were a mere myth, imaginary creatures sent by the gods to lend a hand and redirect arid humans to the correct path. Netheril bowed its head in awe to these messengers of the earth spirits and venerated them. It took
Well, they weren't Netheril yet. They were still the villages.
several years for the elves to convince these scarcely civilized humans that they were mortals. Despite their successes, the humans of Netheril were beginning to exhibit the hubris that would later define their society. The enslavement of the rock gnomes was but one example of how the quest for power
And a sad
began
one
to
at
corrupt
that.
their ideals. While the elves had taught them magic in the hopes of fostering peace and prosperity, the humans had started to view magic as a tool of dominance, a way to elevate themselves above others. This arrogance would only grow as Netheril's power expanded, eventually leading them down a dangerous path. Chapter 2: The Nether Age. The Nether Age marked a critical turning point in the history of Netheril, as a young civilization transitioned from a fledgling collection of magical villages to a full-fledged empire built upon the boundless possibilities of magic. This era, named for the incredible discoveries that would shape Netheril's dominance, saw both the height of human ambition and the darker side of their growing power. The pivotal moment
Wonder
of
how
this
dark.
age occurred in -3533 DR, with the discovery
Larlock,
of the Nether
Arceus.
Scrolls. These ancient tomes, found amongst the ruins of Ari Vandar, were not merely books of spells or arcane theory, they were the very essence of magical knowledge. The scrolls contained the fundamental principles of magic, secrets that even the most learned elven sages had not fully mastered. For the arcanists of Netheril, this discovery opened doors to power and potential that had been previously unimaginable. The Nether Scrolls not only accelerated the Netherese mastery of magic, but it also altered the balance of power in the region forever. This set of 100 scrolls provided the Netherese with an incredible jump in spellcraft, unseen in the history of Toril. With this new knowledge, Netheril's ambitions grew. The Arcanists began experimenting with new types of spells and magical constructs, pushing the boundaries of what could be achieved through magic. The scrolls allowed them to create new forms of magic that were previously thought impossible, and the results were
Such as a 10th level spell to cleave the top of a mountain off, several kilometers long, and build entire cities on top of them. Keep in mind, though, the only way the cities floated was due to the Mythalar. Was the powering gadget. Kept feeding the magic and the spell to allow it to levitate. And it could do control, 6th level control weather, so they'd have perfect weather all the time, and power magical artifacts within a certain distance of it. Up to 20 total Arcanists could be, I think 10, maybe 20? I forget how many could attune to it at once. Even in the early days of like 1E, 2E, and 3 and 3.5, and I never played 4E, so I have no freaking clue. The Netherese didn't have to really, I don't think they had to attune to it. Because you didn't have to attune to legendary items in those editions. It wasn't until 5E that I first got introduced to the attunement system. And certain magical items you have to attune to. So in this case, maybe. But if he really got down and dirty with the details, he would explain why it was called Netheril, why it was called Netherese. because there was a guy, forget who his name was, but he had the name Nether. And that's how they got the name Netheril. Because he discovered those freaking scrolls due to that lich lizard telling him where it was.
Astonishing. But with each new spell and each new discovery, Netheril's thirst for power became insatiable. The scrolls gave them the ability to reshape reality itself, but this power came at a cost. While the Netherese arcanists reveled in their newfound power, the elves began to grow concerned. The elves had lived through millennia and knew well the dangers of unchecked magic. Though they had initially shared their knowledge with the humans, the pace at which the Netherese were advancing now alarmed them. Worse still, the human practice of enslaving the rock gnomes had continued unabated, and the elves viewed this as a grave injustice. The tension between the elves and the humans, once united in mutual defense, had begun to fracture. The elves, particularly those of Illifarn and Erlan, took matters into their own hands. In secret, they began working to undermine Netheril's expansion, hoping to disrupt the Empire's power structure and free the enslaved rock gnomes. With human ambition, the power of Netheril had grown far too great. The Arcanists empowered by the Nether Scrolls began to view themselves as untouchable, seeing even the ancient elves as a challenge they could easily overcome. During this period, Netheril's reach expanded beyond its original borders. New alliances were forged with the Dwarven Kingdom of Delzone, a trade relationship that brought great wealth and resources into Netheril. The Arcanists traded for Dwarven craftsmanship, acquiring precious metals, gems, and weapons. The Dwarves, though hesitant to fully trust the human empire, saw the benefit of this relationship and were willing to look past Netheril's more troubling practices. This relationship would play a key role in the Empire's continued growth and security.
Yep. That's where they got most of their materials.
As Netheril grew in power, it also became more aggressive in its dealings with other human settlements. One of the most infamous acts of this period was the destruction of Thayravel, a neighboring kingdom that had once been an ally of Netheril. The Arcanists of Netheril coveted the magical knowledge held by the Thayravelan scholars and sought to seize it for themselves. In a brutal campaign, Netheril's forces crushed Thayravel, slaughtering many of its people and forcibly extracting the knowledge of their spells from the minds of the survivors. The conquest of Thayravel was a turning point, marking the moment when Netheril shifted from a society focused on exploration and discovery to one driven by conquest and domination.
And take what we
The
want.
absorption of Thayravel's magical secrets only further fueled Netheril's hunger for power, and it became clear that no neighboring kingdoms were safe from their ambition. This event also served as a warning to other potential rivals. To oppose Netheril was to face utter annihilation. The importance placed on magic helped bring Netheril to the top of Toril's magical nations. Despite the violence and growing ruthlessness of Netheril's Arcanists, this period also saw some of the most remarkable achievements in magical study. The study of the Nether Scrolls allowed for the development of new spells and enchanted items, many of which would become the foundation for Netheril's dominance. The Arcanists developed ways to manipulate the weave of magic in ways previously thought impossible, and the scope of their magical prowess expanded rapidly. The discovery of the scrolls and the advancements that followed transformed Netheril from a small, isolated kingdom into a vast empire, feared and respected by all who knew of its power. Yet this rapid expansion led to arrogance. The Arcanists believed themselves to be invincible, with power to control the very forces of the universe. However,
And Mistral could have just ended it like that.
As their power grew, so did the opposition they faced, not only from external forces, but from within their own ranks. The Trail of Mists, a secret network designed to help the enslaved gnomes escape Netheril's oppression, was one of the most direct forms of internal resistance. Though the Arcanists held near absolute power, there were still those within Netheril who saw the injustice of their actions and sought to undermine the system from within. While the Trail of Mist helped many gnomes escape to freedom, it was a dangerous operation, with those caught aiding the gnomes facing severe punishment. Despite these tensions, the Arcanists of Netheril continued their relentless pursuit of power. Their research led to the creation of even more powerful spells, and their influence spread far beyond their borders. Even as they grew, the seeds of dissent and rebellion were being sown. The elves, furious at Netheril's treatment of the gnomes and their reckless use of magic, began to plot against them more openly, though the true confrontation between the two powers was still many years away. The Nether Age was a time of unparalleled growth and discovery for Netheril, but it was also a time of growing darkness. The Arcanists, now fully consumed by their desire for power, had set themselves on a path that would ultimately lead to both great achievements and devastating consequences. As their empire expanded and their knowledge of magic deepened, they began to lose sight of the very principles that had guided them in the beginning. What had once been a society of scholars and explorers was transforming into something far more dangerous, a magical empire that saw itself destined to rule over all. Chapter 3: The Mythalar Era.
There it
The
is.
Mythalar Era marked the zenith of Netheril's power and influence, a period of incredible magical innovation and expansion. This era, spanning from approximately
Mythalar.
negative 2954 DR,
The Mythalar.
was defined by the creation of the Mythalar, a magical device of unprecedented power and utility. With the development of the Mythalar, Netheril transitioned from a society that practiced magic to one that was entirely built around it. Every aspect of life, from the economy to warfare, from transportation to architecture, became infused with arcane power, propelling Netheril to unimaginable heights.
The Mythalar was responsible for the 10th level spell that kept the giant mountains floating that they cut in half, and also responsible for powering multiple magical artifacts within a certain distance of the Mythalar. And the other was the control weather spell, the ability to control the weather as they saw fit in the areas that they were at. Everything was powered through this sucker. Literally. This was the reason why Mistral struggled to repair the weave, because this thing was constantly siphoning the weave to maintain things. Ooh, excuse me.
The birth of this era coincided with the arrival of one of Netheril's greatest figures, Lulam. Born to a modest family.
Yeah, Lulam went through being the greatest creator in Netheril's history to Lich, and then he became a Lich Elderbrain. Yeah, I know. A Lich Elderbrain.
In negative 3095 DR, Lulam's genius quickly became apparent as he rose through the ranks of the Arcanists. By the time he was an adult, his magical prowess had already surpassed that of his peers. But it was not just his power that set him apart, it was his vision. Lulam dreamed of a society where magic was not just a tool wielded by a few, but the very foundation upon which civilization could be built. Lulam's first great achievement was the invention of the Mythalar in negative 3014 DR. The Mythalar was a massive globe-like magical device that could generate immense amounts of magical energy and distribute it over a wide area. What made the Mythalar revolutionary was its ability to power enchanted items and spells, on a scale never seen before. It provided a stable source.
Keep in mind the magical items that the Mythalar created, if you left the distance limit that those items were near the Mythalar, they would shut down. They wouldn't even work anymore. They were specifically connected to the Mythalar to be powered. Unlike other standard enchanted gear, which was considered extremely rare to find and was enchanted through other means and could maintain itself magically, the Mythalar's enchanted items could not.
Source of magical energy that did not rely on the constant concentration or effort of a single caster. For the first time in history, magic could be harnessed like a natural resource, used to power cities, move armies, and manipulate the environment itself. With the creation of the Mythalar, Lulam laid the foundation for Netheril's floating cities, or enclaves. The most famous and awe-inspiring of all Netherese achievements. The first of these enclaves was Zin Lanal, raised into the sky in negative 2954 DR. Suspended by the power of the Mythalar, Zin Lanal was a marvel of magical engineering and a prototype for dozens of floating cities that would follow. These cities, far removed from the concerns of the ground dwellers below, became the seat of power for the most influential and skilled arcanists, who lived in luxury while overseeing the vast lands beneath them. It allowed the Netherese arcanists to create magical items without the need of a permanency spell, and provided the constant magical force that allowed entire mountains to hover in the air. The creation of the floating cities gave rise to a division between High Netheril, the floating enclaves, and Low Netheril, the communities that remained on the ground.
Another reason for their downfall. The whole, we're more important than you because we were born into this situation. But at first, Netheril was meritocracy. Like, if you were talented, and you could succeed. But it slowly diverged away from that, where certain arcanists, rather than accepting the course of their life, chose to extend that life, refusing to give up that power and extending it for hundreds and hundreds of years. One Netherese arcanist lived to be 3,000 years old. It's not surprising to know who it is, but we'll let the video continue because I can't remember the name of it.
Citizens of High Netheril were the magical elite, living splendor and comfort far above the reach of normal folk. Meanwhile, the people of Low Netheril, who lacked access to the Mythalar's vast magical resource, were seen as lesser, fit only for labor and menial tasks. This division between the magical and non-magical classes would have far-reaching consequences in the centuries to come. Despite these internal divisions, Netheril continued to expand during the Mythalar era. Lulam, now recognized as the greatest arcanist of his time, led the Netherese in a series of campaigns to secure the lands surrounding their empire.
I think he was the one who assembled a massive Netherese force of like 100,000 plus strong to basically wipe out the orcs until there was none of them left. Only a minor amount survived, to the point where they would not be able to reproduce and threaten the Netherese ever again.
The most significant of these campaigns was a war against the orc hordes that had long plagued the southern regions near the Plain of Standing Stones. In negative 3012 DR, Lulam personally led the Netherese forces in a decisive battle, using his unparalleled magical might to decimate the orcish armies. The extermination of the orcs in the region allowed Netheril to expand its influence unchecked, clearing the way for new settlements and more floating enclaves. Over 140,000 orcs were slaughtered, their bodies reddening the snow of two mountains that became known as Bone Hill and Thunder Peak. The extermination of the Orcish threat was seen as a great victory, but it also reflected a growing ruthlessness in Netherese foreign policy. The Arcanists became increasingly willing to use their magic not just to defend their borders, but to conquer and subjugate those they saw as inferior. This was most clearly demonstrated by the continued enslavement of the rock gnomes, who remained in chains despite ongoing efforts by the elves to liberate them. The Trail of Mists, a secret network established by elven sympathizers to help gnomes escape from Netherese oppression.
Keep in mind, most of these fantasy worlds follow our real-world history with mythos and other things like the Underground Railroad. That's an example of that. The Trail of Mists. That's an example of that. One person who's well known for that was Tolkien with Lord of the Rings. A ton of his stuff was represented from his books was represented by in real life religion and different creatures and things like that. Like, you can't get that far. Oh, and I want to state this fact: wyverns have 2 wings and 2 legs and a stinger for pointing venom. Dragons have 4 legs and have wings. Please don't confuse that. Any series, show, or anything that you watch that says a dragon is this and only shows a dude with 2 wings and 2 legs and a tail, that is not a dragon. That is a wyvern.
Continued to operate during this period, but its efforts were met with fierce resistance from the Netherese ruling class. Even as these tensions simmered, Netheril's magical advancements continued at an unprecedented pace. Lulam, ever the innovator, began creating the first Mythallar-powered magic items.
Lich.
These items, which drew power directly from the Mythallar, were capable of sustaining incredibly powerful magical enchantments indefinitely, without the need for a caster to constantly maintain them. Such items became commonplace in High Netheril, where everything, from transportation to architecture, was imbued with magical energy. With each new discovery, the gap between High and Low Netheril widened. The floating enclaves became centers of art, culture, and magical innovation, while the lands below provided the food, labor, and resources necessary to sustain the luxurious lifestyles of the Arcanists. The people of Low Netheril, increasingly marginalized and impoverished, began to grow discontent with their lot, but their grievances were largely ignored by the ruling elite. The floating cities, removed as they were from the realities of life on the ground, seemed invulnerable to the problems that plagued the common folk. Yet despite these growing tensions, the Mythallar era was a time of extraordinary achievement. Netheril's floating cities were a marvel of the world, attracting scholars, traders, and adventurers from distant lands. Magical research flourished, and the Arcanists of Netheril pushed the boundaries of what was possible with magic. New spells were created at a staggering rate, and magical constructs and golems became commonplace in the floating cities. For many, it seemed that Netheril's glory would last forever. Under Lulam's guidance, the Empire had transformed into a beacon of magical innovation, a land where anything seemed possible. The floating cities were symbols of human triumph over the natural world, and the Mythallar had unlocked possibilities that had been the stuff of dreams. But as with all great powers, Netheril's success carried with it the seeds of its own downfall. The very magic that had elevated the Empire to greatness would one day bring about its ruin. For now, though, such concerns were far from the minds of the Netherese Arcanists. Netheril's future seemed as bright as the floating cities themselves, and Lulam, the Master Arcanist, continued to push the boundaries of what magic could achieve.
Felt like more like an
Chapter
artificer.
4. The Silver Age. The Silver Age of Netheril was a period of stabilization, reflection, and political evolution. While the Mythalar era had brought about unparalleled magical advancement and expansion, it also introduced internal tensions and an increasingly dangerous reliance on arcane power. As Netheril settled into its newfound power, the Empire began to face challenges that could not be solved with magic alone. In this era, the governance of Netheril evolved to match the complexity of its society. The magical elite who ruled the floating enclaves, known as High Netheril, were forced to develop new systems of government to address the growing needs of their civilization. In negative 2943 DR, the formation of the High Mages of Netheril, a council of the most powerful and influential arcanists, marked a turning point in how Netheril was governed. This council became the ruling body of Netheril, responsible for making decisions that affected the entire empire. In the year negative 1963, Netheril bore witness to an internal menace. Citizens who had little aptitude or respect for magic. The establishment of the High Mages brought a level of order and collaboration to Netherese society.
Oh, excuse me again.
These mages were no longer individual wizards pursuing personal power, but rather a collective that sought to guide the empire. Though they wielded incredible magical abilities, they also recognized that such power had to be tempered with wisdom.
That was random.
The High Mages, drawn from both High and Low Netheril, worked to balance the needs of the magical elite with those of common folk, ensuring that the empire could maintain its dominance while avoiding civil unrest. The challenges that Netheril faced were not only internal. The theft of several nether scrolls by an unknown thief in negative 2847 DR sent shockwaves through the magical community. The scrolls, which had been the foundation of Netheril's magical power, had been kept in highly guarded locations, and their sudden disappearance raised concerns about the security of the empire. The scrolls were reportedly returned to the ancient ruins of Iqua Tel Qasir, a mysterious location steeped in elven lore. This incident reignited tensions between the elves and the Netherese, with many in Netheril accusing the elves of plotting against their empire.
Well, there is information about the thief. They believe it was a rock gnome, one of the escaped slaves, because after they basically before this, the rock gnomes were starting to learn illusion magic, and their illusion magic was so good they could get in and out of anywhere without even being seen. A lot of people believe, some like myself, that a rock gnome stole Netherese scrolls multiple times and either got rid of them, sold them, or gave them back to the elves. Like, some got forged into tiny little golden balls. Because, like I said, they were originally called the golden scales of the world serpent.
At the same time, the dilemma of gnome slavery began to weigh heavily on the minds of some of Netheril's rulers. The rock gnomes, who had been enslaved by the Netherese for centuries, continued to labor under harsh conditions. While the practice of gnome slavery had once been seen as a necessity for the expansion of the empire, the increasing influence of the High Mages brought about a shift in perspective. The council recognized that the continued subjugation of the gnomes would not only tarnish Netheril's reputation, but could also lead to further conflict with their elven allies. In negative 2845 DR, after years of debate and growing pressure from both external forces and internal reformers, the High Mages decreed that all gnome slaves were to be freed. While the decision was a moral victory, it also revealed deep fractures within Netheril's society. The reliance on slave labor had propped up many of the agricultural and industrial sections of Low Netheril, and the sudden emancipation of the gnomes left many communities scrambling to adjust. Netherese commoners.
Well, believe me, they adjusted at the end. Now, I'm not referring to saying free the rock gnome slaves. I'm literally referring to the fact when Karsus went and made Netheril go boom. There's a lot of adapting.
And less powerful arcanists who are not yet capable of creating Mythalar continued to dwell in the cities
Mythalar
and
is my
keeps on the
favorite
ground.
artifact because it's so cool.
As Netheril moved forward, the lessons of the Silver Age became ingrained in its collective consciousness. The mistakes of the past continued to haunt the Empire, even as its arcanists reached for the stars. Yet for all their wisdom and magical prowess, the arcanists of Netheril remained blind to the greater dangers lurking just beyond their grasp. Chapter 5: The Golden Age. The Golden Age of Netheril, spanning from -2103 DR to -1382 DR, was a time when the Empire reached the absolute height of its magical prowess and territorial influence. The floating enclaves of High Netheril.
During the time of Netheril, the Mind Flayers were invading realm space, and they had pretty much conquered most of it. And Netheril thought that they could also do something similar by going into realm space. But they sent a ship or a few ships, I forget, into realm space. They went toe-to-toe with the Mind Flayers. And while they were significantly stronger and better than the Mind Flayers had something similar to what, if you've seen Stargate Atlantis, there is a species that overwhelmed the ancients. That's what happened here. Because they had such a sheer amount of numbers, they overwhelmed the Netherese. Because the Netherese, technologically and magically, were superior to the Mind Flayers. The Mind Flayers didn't have a chance, but their overwhelming numbers and ships forced Netheril to keep itself restricted to Faerun and other planes. So they couldn't take realm space, but they would explain elemental planes, limbo, the Nine Hells, the Abyss. They definitely explored the Abyss because for Illum to become a Lich, he had to have talked to Orcus. There's just no way to believe he didn't.
Soared above Faerun as beacons of human achievement, while its arcanists, now masters of the arcane, pushed the boundaries of magical discovery even further. It was an era of vast conquests, bold exploration, and remarkable feats of magic. This era began with a tragic event. In -2103 DR, a vast orc horde from the spine of the world attacked the northern city of Elusk, a human settlement fortified by Netherese arcanists. Elusk had long stood as a buffer against the monstrous threats of the north, but despite the valiant efforts of the Chronomancer, one of Netheril's greatest time-manipulating wizards, the city fell to the orcs. The loss of Elusk was a bitter blow, revealing that even with all their magic, the Netherese were not invincible. Yet, rather than dampen their ambition, this defeat spurred the Netherese onto greater heights. In the aftermath of Elusk's fall, Netheril turned its gaze outward, not just across Faerun, but to the world beneath and beyond. The dwarves of Delzoun, always a key ally and trading partner, founded the city of rubies, Zindilspar. In -1715 DR, built with the help of Netherese expatriates, the city flourished, becoming a shining example of Netherese dwarven cooperation. The establishment of such cities reflected a growing trend amongst the Netherese elite. While the floating enclaves were still the center of power, some of Netheril's most daring mages began seeking new frontiers beyond their borders, expanding their influence across Faerun and the Inner Sea. It was during this time, in 1770 DR, that the Netherese began to explore the depths of the Inner Sea. Driven by curiosity and a desire to expand their magical knowledge, they established 3 crystal dome subsea colonies.
Oh, they also tried to check out the Far Realm too. That was a mistake. Because the magic of our world has no bearing on anything in the Far Realm.
On the continental shelf of the land that would eventually become Sembia. These colonies, Coolmath, Wirapan, and Ulavis, collectively known as Deep Netheril. These feats of magical engineering, protected by powerful enchantments and sustained by the mythalar technology that had made the floating cities possible. The exploration of the inner sea demonstrated that Netheril's ambitions knew no bounds. In these crystal dome cities, Netheril experimented with water-based magic.
Until the Faerun, when those things show up, this is when Netheril's fall begins.
Studied the sea life, and sought to uncover ancient, submerged ruins. With these ventures came the darker side of Netheril. The Cerosians, a race of Lokata who wandered near the Netherese holdings, were enslaved by the Arcanists of Deep Netheril. For the Cerosians, this was a catastrophic development, and their plight did not go unnoticed by the ancient elven kingdoms under the sea. The High Mages of Ari Selmalir, an elven kingdom that had long ruled the waters of the inner sea, were incensed by Netheril's actions. They saw the Netherese as reckless and dangerous, willing to subjugate anyone in their quest for magical power. In negative 1660 DR, Ari Selmalir's High Mages unleashed a devastating counterstrike. Using powerful magics, they transformed the very crystal domes that protected Deep Netheril into a substance that burned upon contact with water. The subsequent explosions obliterated the colonies, killing thousands of Netherese settlers and creating the Sirloon Bay and the Selgant Bay, reshaping the coastline forever. While the loss of these colonies were a severe blow to Netheril's expansionist ambitions, it did little to temper their relentless drive to master the world through magic. The Empire continued to push its boundaries, with explorers and arcanists venturing into the farthest reaches of Faerun and beyond. The Golden Age also saw the proliferation of floating enclaves, with many new ones being constructed. These enclaves became not only centers of power, but symbols of Netherese dominance. Each enclave was a marvel of arcane engineering, built to house thousands of mages, scholars, and artisans who lived lives of unimaginable luxury.
And as Raphael said, "Oh, the screams, as the ground came up to meet them."
The expansion of the Empire also brought Netheril into conflict with other powers. In negative 1427 DR, the flourishing city of rubies, Zindilspar, was invaded by the Kalashite warlord Namalik Nadim, who led an army of monsters from Kalimshan. Despite the city's strong defenses and the magical prowess of its arcanist inhabitants, Zindilspar fell within 10 days. The loss of such a valuable city marked another significant setback for Netheril's influence in the south. He very well could have taken healing and curative spells to fix his ailment, but, like all of Netheril archwizards, he believed the gods were merely archwizards like himself who had found ultimate magic. Their pride wouldn't allow them to put their faith in the deities, for fear if they put their trust in these advanced archwizards, they would never achieve ultimate magic themselves. Amidst these triumphs and losses, tension simmered with...
I mean, true, but the difference between the gods and them was like night and day. The gods... Well, let's start with something obvious. Mistral was undoubtedly the most powerful god at that time. There's no question. Tyr may have come in as a close second, but it was definitely Mistral, because everyone used magic. For the gods to even give divine blessings, magic was the key, and that was where the weave came in. Shar tried to create something opposing to her own daughter's weave, as in the shadow weave, but that was used more for sinister intentions. The point is that everything that they tried to become, they believed themselves to be above the gods. The gods, for all foreseeable, most of them, were omnipotent, meaning they had unlimited access to power. There was also, some of them had omniscience, where they were omnipresent. They could be anywhere they wanted, do anything that they wanted to. Except Ao restricted them. Because there was a time, way before the time of troubles, way before the sundering, way before anything, that Ao, after the creation of Aber Terrell, he opened up the crystal sphere, allowing any inhabitants that wished to enter to become gods. Then, after so many came in, he closed it, and then the gods came, and they came to Aber Terrell, and they were there. But then, the primordials didn't like him very much, and the gods didn't like them very much, so they warred with each other, destroying the land. Ao intervened, so he split the single planet into what we know as a Barrow Terrell, where one was a place for the elemental primordials to be, and another was for where the gods and their creations could reside. Then the gods did something even stupider. They created the Titans. They were godly created beings. The gods were so full of themselves. They literally created beings that were exactly as strong and as powerful as they were in mortal bodies on Faerun. And they did this, leading to Kronos going on a war with them, killing every god he came across, and then proceeding to get sealed in a giant illusion to prevent him from ever coming out. But he keeps slaying gods in that illusion. The gods fear that one day he'll slay every god in that illusion, and because of that, they worry that he'll set him free. But that hasn't happened so far. The point is, the gods did many things that were just as stupid as the Netherese. The gods, for all intents and purposes, until they were put in line by Ao, were chaotic. They were very chaotic. Everything they did was chaotic. You do chaotic evil and you chaotic good. They were very chaotic beings, and proceeded to create the mortal races. For all intents and purposes, chaotic beings. I mean, look at what the humans did. They're chaotic. Creating Netheril, all the magic, all the enslaving. It was crazy. It was crazy what they did.
Within Netheril itself, the reliance on magic had, over time, created deep divisions within society. The floating cities of High Netheril, where the magic elite resided, became increasingly disconnected from the common folk living on the ground below, in Low Netheril. The Arcanists, isolated in their enclaves, became more and more detached from the concerns of the common people, leading to resentment and unrest in the lower regions of the Empire.
Oh, excuse me.
Chapter 6. The Enclaves of Netheril. During the height of Netheril,
Yeah, the Arcanists who ruled each of their enclaves, became literal tyrants. They just ruled, and that was it. No more hearing anyone's opinions, no more council, no more gathering of these big old mages. They literally just tuned out everything. Their only goal was to live forever. They did not want to age. When they started to age, and one who lived for 3,000 years, they literally just tucked themselves off from society. Some became liches. Others disappeared without knowing what happened to them. And yeah, the Netherese downfall begins pretty much at this point.
the Empire achieved unparalleled mastery over magic, culminating in the construction of the legendary floating enclaves. These massive self-contained cities floated high above the world, powered by arcane devices called mythalars. Each enabled them to defy gravity and support a complex magical society. Each enclave had its own unique culture, leadership, and magical innovations, serving as both homes and centers of research for Netheril's greatest arcanists. In this chapter, we will explore 5 notable enclaves: Selunara, Thultanthar, Eilinar, Zin Linel, and their histories. Selunara, also known as Opus, was one of the most unique of Netheril's enclaves. Unlike many other floating cities, which focused primarily on arcane pursuits, Silunara was a center of devotion to the goddess Selûne and her teachings. The enclave
Selûne and Shar, the first and only two gods that I'm aware of that Ao himself created. He created them to create the world. I believe it was a Beryl, or it was Terrell. I forget how it was split up. But they created the world, then warred with each other, because they couldn't agree on it, just like Ahriman and Jasirion, when they were creating the universe. Before Ao, I will never let this go. I think this to the end of my days. Ahriman, who is Asmodeus, and Jasirion, creator of the Quaddles, were the last survivors of the ancient war among all the champions of chaos. This is before even the Abyss. And they fought each other. After that, they were the two survivors. So, Ahriman and Jasirion bit each other's tails and formed the Ouroboros, also known as the Circle, creating the concept of lawful evil and lawful good, and any other laws that fall in between those same categories. That created the laws which fundamentally created the realms that we know of today. All of them. Some didn't fully complete, others did, based on the influence of other outers that came after Ahriman and Jasirion, but they created the multiverse. But it was actually only supposed to be one universe. The problem happened was when Ahriman and Jasirion, just like Selûne and Shar, could not agree on where the center of the universe would be. Hello there. Welcome, Splat. And they could not figure out where the center of the universe would be. So they tugged at each other's tail. Ahriman wanted it to be in Bator, and you had Jasirion who wanted it to be at Mount Celestia. So, because they created the laws, which created gravity, which created the concept of all creation. Oh, thank you. And because they created all that, one of them had wings to fly, the other did not. So when they tore each other's tails, Ahriman fell through the nine hells, creating the vast amount of craters. His blood created the first pit fiends. And Jasirion rose to the top of Mount Celestia. This is the reason for the multiverse in D&D, is because those two could not agree on a center of the universe. So, after those two, Ao came. Because with the fundamental laws created, and now the multiverse, and since he's the overseer god of the multiverse, Ao came along. And the craziest things started. Then you got Shar, Selûne, the battle with the elementals, the gods, and then you've got the dragon gods. And that's a whole nother story. That involves Io. But I believe that was just an interpretation. But yeah, Netherese and the gods and the whole thing with Ao, it just seems to trickle down from the very top and just continue in all their creations.
Enclave's blend of divine and arcane magic made
Oh,
it
you've never
stand
seen
out,
anything from D&D?
and its residents
It's,
were known as
it's a lot of
protectors
lore.
of the balance between light and shadow.
But I'm a lore fiend, and
The
I love this
Arcanists
kind
of
of stuff.
Silunara
40K,
placed great emphasis
Cthulhu
on maintaining
mythos,
harmony between
Dungeons
the
and
natural
Dragons,
world
which is my
magic,
favorite one because
and
the
the
lore
divine
is so in
forces.
depth, and there's so
While
much
many
of it.
Netherese enclaves were driven by a relentless pursuit of power, Silunara's leaders sought a more harmonious path, fostering a blend of arcane and divine magic. This spiritual aspect attracted clerics and mystics, and the enclave became a place where both magic and religion flourished side by side. Thultanthar, often referred to as the City of Shade, was one of the most powerful and secretive enclaves in Netheril. Founded later in the Empire's history, Thultanthar
It's a
became
lot to take in
synonymous with its
since I've
mastery
been
of
playing this
shadow
video
magic,
for about an hour
and
now,
its leader, Telamon
because I've been
Tanthul,
stopping it at points to
a powerful
fill in
arcanist
blanks that
who
weren't there.
ruled with his 12 sons, known as the Princes of Shade. While
some of
most
this lore I'm not even
enclaves
familiar
focused
with.
on traditional
This
magic
is more
powered
like
by the weave,
in-town
Thultanthar's
gossip
arcanists
that you
delved
hear
deeply into
that you
shadow
don't know about
magic,
because you're looking at the bigger
an arcane
picture.
tradition that drew on the power of the shadow plane. This gave the city and its residents unparalleled control over illusions, darkness, and shadowy energies,
I believe they're the
allowing them to
city or
perform feats
enclave
of
that
magic
transported into
that
the
other enclaves could not.
shadow
Eilinar
area.
was one of Netheril's most prestigious
Nah, I don't
enclaves,
stream on Twitch.
known for its
Twitch
focus
is
on cutting-edge magical research.
not a
It
place
was
I
ruled by
like.
Karsus,
They don't
prodigy
enforce their
amongst
TOS equally
Netherese
among everybody.
alchemists, and the
And
creator
it's mainly
of many
bathtubs
advanced
with
magical
girls in bikinis
innovations.
and a bunch of other stuff that I
Eilinar
do
was
not like
considered
watching.
a hub of magical progress, and its residents were some of the most powerful mages in the Empire. Eilinar was renowned for its groundbreaking magical research.
Oh, looks like it's going
Arcanists
over
from
the
across
enclaves.
Netheril traveled to Eilinar to study with Karsus and his followers,
Yeah, my other streaming platform is
seeking to
Kick.
master
I stream
advanced
on
forms
Kick.
of magic.
YouTube and Kick.
The city became synonymous with heavy magic, a raw and potent form of arcane power that Karsus developed.
Well,
Eilinar
I've
was also known for its
seen
vast
many
libraries,
VTubers
where scrolls and tomes detailing
Twitch,
the
as you would
secrets of the
think.
weave were kept.
I mainly come across more
It
of their
was home to
content
some
on
of the most
YouTube,
sophisticated
just
magical
not on
academies in
Twitch as
Netheril,
often.
and its mages were often at the forefront of the Empire's most daring and experimental projects. Zinlanal holds a special place in the history of Netheril as the first floating enclave ever created. It was the brainchild of Lulam, one of Netheril's most legendary arcanists, and became the prototype for all other enclaves that followed. As the earliest example of Netheril's mastery over the weave, Zinlanal was a beacon of Netheril's magical ingenuity and ambition. In -2954 DR, Lulam successfully created the first Mythalar-powered floating city, which became known as Zinlanal. This breakthrough changed the course of Netheril's history, allowing the Empire to both expand upward and outward, beyond the constraints of the natural world. Zinlanal was also where the first Mythalar-powered magic
they
items were
find
created.
any way to violate
These items,
Twitch terms
powered
of
by the
service
city's
and
central
manipulate it.
Mythalar,
Like some were doing
capable
those
of
censor
incredible
bar
feats,
things where
from
they would just
allowing
cover
objects
up
to float and fly,
their chests
to
while they were
providing
already exposed.
near limitless magical
And then
energy
there's
from
those new
spells and
streams
enchantments.
that are going on Twitch.
This
Where
success
the girls
of these innovations
like to
spurred
hide
the creation
away
of
from the
many
screen
more
and
enclaves
cameras for
in
an
the
hour to
centuries
2
to
hours
follow.
and will say
The
over and over, "Oh,
floating
don't worry, we're
enclaves
coming.
in Netheril
Don't worry,
were
we'll
more
be
than
on
just
there."
cities.
And then
They
3
were
hours
symbols
later,
of the
they get on there,
Empire's mastery over
and
magic,
people show up to
and
watch
the
it.
limitless potential that the Netherese believed they could harness. Each enclave had its own character, from the balanced, divine focus of Selunara to the shadowy intrigue of Thultanthar, the groundbreaking innovation of Zinlanal. These enclaves stood as pinnacles
Did they tap
of
into
magical
Shadow
achievement.
Wave?
Their histories intertwined with the
Sharsweave?
evolution of arcane power in the world of Faerun. Their legacies, both in magic and in lore, continue to captivate scholars and adventurers alike. Chapter 7: The Age of Discovery.
What was left to be
The Age of
discovered?
Discovery was a time of bold experimentation, as
Oh
Netheril
no.
reached even further beyond its borders,
That's right, they made those
seeking to unravel the deepest mysteries of the multiverse.
transmutation spells.
After centuries
It's
of
what created
magical
the owl barrel.
supremacy,
The owl
Netherese
bear.
arcanists grew restless, driven by their insatiable curiosity and ambition to push the
Let's see
boundaries
if I
of
take
reality
this thing
itself.
and merge it with this thing. What will
This
it
period,
make?
which spanned from -1114
A vicious
DR
beaked
to 800 DR, was characterized by exploration into other worlds, planar research.
The age of discovery is when they decided to experiment with living things. It got pretty bad at this point because they were obsessed with knowledge and the constant need to test things out. So they decided to play God and mess with life itself. One experiment, it was a 9th level spell. And in D&D, there's levels to spells, but the 9th level spell is the highest tier at that point. And they created a spell which allowed them to take one creature and merge it with another. And one of those creations was the thing called the Owl Bear. The Owl Bear literally was a head of an owl and the body of a bear, but with the claws and the beak of the owl. It's one of the creepiest things that they made. They made some other creepy stuff. They even created these Netheries created these undead golems with this spell that were specifically designed to protect their treasuries, and they still roam around even after Netheril's fall, with no one commanding them. But if they won't hurt anybody, they don't harm humans. However, if you raid the treasure vaults, they will attack. And they're very creepy looking. It's like something right out of an Eldritch nightmare. And if you've ever seen Cthulhu Mythos, then that's what it is. Two sides in D&D? Not sure what you mean. You mean evil and good? I have no idea. Evil, good, lawful evil, lawful good. Oh yeah, they do. In previous editions of D&D, going back to first, second, and first edition, second edition, third edition, and 3.5 edition, there were alignments. Alignments dictated the class and your character's direction and how they should act. And those start and begin with lawful evil and lawful good. And then in between those, you have chaotic evil and chaotic good. And then you've got neutral evil and neutral good. And then in the middle, you have neutral. These are all the alignments in D&D. But I didn't stick around for 4th edition, so I can't talk about that one. But 5th edition, alignments were pretty much thrown out the door. You could just say your character's alignment, and that's what you be. But alignments didn't affect characters anymore. But in the 1st and 3rd editions, they did. They were a major factor in your character and the direction that they could take and the classes that they could take. Because for anyone to be a paladin in 1st, 2nd, and 3rd edition, you had to be lawful good, and you couldn't be anything else. If you wanted to be an evil paladin, you had to be lawful evil, which is a blackguard. There's all kinds of stuff to it.
And dangerous experiments that would ultimately yield both incredible discoveries and dire consequences. By negative 1114 DR, Netheril society had reached a peak of magical and scientific understanding within their world. Their curiosity turned outward, towards the plains beyond Faerun.
And just a little note on this, everyone. This scene that they're about to discuss is when they decided, hey, we're going to go into realm space and try to conquer that now. And proceeded to get their butts owned by the Mind Flayers, which are Cthulhu-looking tentacled monsters that feed on human brains.
The idea of traveling to other worlds, something that had been touched upon during the Golden Age, became a central focus of Netheril's experimentation. Arcanists devised complex rituals and spells that allowed them to reach into the far realms, the Abyss, and other planes, hoping to unlock untapped sources of power.
Oh, and Netheril, he mentioned in this video the Far Realms. They did try to do that, and everyone who went on that party's expedition to create an outpost in the Far Realms went completely insane. The Far Realms is the H.P. Lovecraft universe of the Cthulhu Mythos, where every Eldritch Nightmare exists. That exists in D&D. And the Far Realms were outside the scope of realm space and the current universe they lived in. So when they thought their magical wards would protect them when they went there, they soon found out it didn't protect them from anything. They went completely mad, and the entire expedition, well, they didn't come back.
And new forms of magic. These early experiments were fraught with peril. Many who ventured into these otherworldly dimensions never returned, consumed by the strange and incomprehensible forces that resided there. Despite these dangers, the Netheris remained undeterred, believing that the risks were worth the potential rewards. The High Netheris in particular saw planar exploration as their next great conquest, and many of the floating enclaves turned their resources towards that goal. In negative 1064 DR, Netheril made the first contact with one of the most terrifying entities in the multiverse, the Illithids, or Mind Flayers.
Illithids are Mind Flayers. That's one example of what they look like. There's different iterations. But The lithids come in three forms. One that looks like that, another that has a really big squid head, and the other one is a smaller squid head but looks more like a puppy. It's weird. But yeah, they came across them because at that point, the Elithids had conquered most of realm space, and they ruled it. Netherese were like, we can take them. Well, technically speaking, the Netherese could have fought the Mind Flayers, but they couldn't beat them because the Mind Flayers had overwhelming numbers, like way more numbers than they could handle. So while the Mind Flayers' technology was not superior to Netheril's lack of numbers in order to go out there was no match for the Mind Flayers' overwhelming numbers.
The Elithids, a race of powerful psionic creatures with a mastery over mental domination, represented a dark and malevolent force within the universe. The Netherese were fascinated by their abilities.
There's the puppy-looking ones right there.
Seeing in the Mind Flayers both a threat and a potential avenue of knowledge. For a time, the two civilizations engaged in precarious exchange of information, though neither trusted the other. The Elithids, who sought to subjugate entire worlds to their own purposes, probably viewed Netheril as a curiosity, a potential ally, or
it's
a future adversary.
Monster. Straight out of Cthulhu.
Meanwhile, the Arcanists studied the Elithids' psionic abilities and their unique methods for controlling reality. This exchange, while brief, most likely had a profound impact on the Netherese magical research. However, contact was cut off for one reason or another. Did the Netherese Arcanists find the Mind Flayers too dangerous to work with? Or were the Elithids afraid of the Arcanists?
Well, not entirely, because one of the Arcanists of the Netherese Empire, Emoa, right, I always mispronounce his name, but he was the one who created the Mythalar. He decided to become a Lich, which is an undead immortal, because he was unable to sustain his age any longer through normal magical means. And he sought out the Mind Flayers after he left Netheril and found an Elder Brain and proceeded to put his own consciousness into the Elder Brain and make it into an undead Elder Brain. The Elder Brain is the supreme consciousness that controls all the Mind Flayers, or at least a small portion of them. There's multiple Mind Flayers, not just one.
By 1014 DR, the dangers of planar travel became increasingly evident. While the Elithid experiments yielded some useful knowledge, many expeditions to the plains resulted in disaster. The Netherese began to understand that these otherworldly realms were far more treacherous and complex than they had anticipated.
One realm they went to was so chaotic, it had no physical form. And the only way to control it is with psionics. Psionics is using your brain, like telekinetics or telekinesis, to forge something out of nothing. And that's around the realm they visited was called Limbo. It was a chaotic realm, and this is before a lot of other stuff that happened. I am pretty much streaming normally on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 1p to 5p. But sometimes the times will vary because it depends on what I've got to do during the day. Because it's either I'm working on the house or I've got to do my usual cleanup routine, or taking care of the bathrooms, or dealing with the cats and their hair messes and things like that. I have to clean up, so I'll normally only stream on those 3 days if it gets too chaotic. However, there are special circumstances where I will stream every day, and usually between noon and 5p. And if that's the case, then the times will vary. Sadly, I can't maintain a consistent stream schedule. It's not possible with the rate at which I have to take care of two houses at once.
The energies within these planes were often incompatible with the weave, causing magical failures, madness, and even death of entire enclaves. The costs of such exploration began to outweigh the benefits, and the High Mages decided to refocus their efforts back on Faerun, recognizing that the multiverse was not as easily conquerable as they had hoped. Though planar exploration was largely abandoned, Netheril did not cease its pursuit of knowledge. Instead, the Arcanists turned their attention to exploring the farthest reaches of Faerun, delving deep beneath the surface of the world.
This part right here is where their downfall truly began. They quite literally dug too deep, too greedily and too deeply, just like the dwarves, and released a creature known as the Faerun. The Faerun are a creature that eats magic. They eat magic. So when you launch an arcane spell against them, they go, snack time. And the Netherese had no way to beat them because they were entirely a magical society.
Sargoth the Main, in the heart of Undermountain, a vast and labyrinthian underground realm that would later become the domain of the mad wizard Hallister Blackcloak. Sargoth the Main was a center for arcane research, where the Netherese mages experimented with forbidden magic, seeking to harness the power of the Underdark and the ancient forces that dwelled there. Despite the incredible advancements made during this era, the Age of Discovery was also a time of growing unease. But the future of Netheril would only get more grim from here on. The Faerun claimed that some unknown force on the surface world was killing its children and making the old and infirm die before their time. It wanted to know who upon the surface was using magic. Oliston sat and told the creature everything he knew of the Netherese culture, and how they were wasteful and decadent. The Faerun listened to every word Oliston uttered about the Netherese.
This was the start. Now, because they eat magic, the reason why their children were dying because of the Netherese was because the Netherese Arcanists, who ruled their enclaves, the giant floating cities, were absorbing magic to sustain their life. So, they would live for thousands of years. The oldest living Netherese lived to be 3,000 before he decided to become a lich. And because of this, and using the magic to sustain their life, it's assumed, no one can confirm or deny it. Not even Ed Greenwood, the creator, has said anything. But it's believed that because the Arcanists who ruled their enclaves were absorbing magic to sustain their lives, that was the same type of magic the Faerun's children need to feed on in order to survive. Because they're growing and developing, they can't eat normal raw magic like their adult selves. So their children were being killed. It was pretty much a weird side effect that no one could have seen coming.
Chapter 8. The Shadowed Age. In negative 696 DR, the year of great rains, one of the most infamous figures in Netheril's history was born, Karsus. From a young age, Karsus exhibited an extraordinary aptitude for magic, far exceeding that of his peers. His natural talent, ambition, and thirst for knowledge quickly set him on a path that would lead to both incredible innovation and ultimately the ruin of the Empire.
Karsus is considered to some to be the greatest arcanist in the history of magic, and also the most powerful. The guy created multiple spells above 9th level. As a result, he ended up being the youngest arcanist in history to get his own enclave. So, he was naturally gifted, very talented, and very ambitious. The problem is that his ambition would eventually lead to the fall of all of Netheril, because he recognized the threat the Faerun were creating for them, but didn't understand the subtle nuances between how the Netherese and the Faerun were inadvertently hurting each other. because the Faerûn went to war with the Netherese. The Netherese need magic to function, while the Faerûn eat magic. And because they attacked the Netherese for killing their children, they also proceeded to, fight back. And because of the result of their fight, magically induced soil, or what plants were infused with magic, slowly died out, causing a gigantic area of Faerûn, which is the continent that this is all located on, to turn into just a desert with no life. Because the Faerûn ate all the magic there in order to subvert the Netherese's ability to have resources. And they were constantly at war with each other. Now, I don't know of any Netherese arcanists that succeeded in killing a Faerûn. At most that I heard, they sealed him away. But this happened after Netheril's fall, when the Faerûn didn't have their enemy anymore. They still were staying above the surface and feeding on land. So some group, I forget, fought with them and then sealed them away in another realm. So, in Karsus, his reason for the downfall will be made apparent in the video. I don't want to give that away, but it's pretty bad.
By negative 669 DR, Karsus had grown into one of the most powerful arcanists in Netheril. His relentless pursuit of magical mastery led him to establish the floating city of Eilinar, which became a hub of magical research and experimentation. Eilinar stood as a testament to Karsus's ambition and brilliance, where he and his followers delved into the depths of magic, including dangerous forms of heavy magic that drew directly from the raw essence of the weave. Karsus believed that magic was the ultimate force for reshaping reality, and he saw himself as the one who could unlock its potential. His experiments in Eilinar pushed the limits of arcane power, and his growing influence over the magical community led to tension with other Netherese arcanists, who feared that Karsus's ambition would have dire consequences for the Empire. Knowledge has always outweighed wisdom, and Karsus was no exception. The Shadowed Age also led to the discovery of the Faerûns, a race of ancient, malevolent, psionically powerful beings that lived beneath the surface of the Anarok region. The Faerûns had long remained.
They look like a sunflower with claws, with teeth in the middle of it, and tentacles on the outside. It literally looks like an uprooted sunflower that mutated. I've always said this about them because that's what they look like. And that's a Faerûn. That's what they look like. I said they were eldritch abominations, and that's what they are. But they look like a sunflower that mutated and popped out of the ground.
Hidden from the Netherese. But as the Empire expanded and its arcanists began delving deeper into the earth, they uncovered these creatures, bringing about a chain of disastrous events. Around 461 DR, the Faerûns began casting their devastating life-draining magic that targeted the fertile lands of Low Netheril. The spells rapidly sapped the life from the land, turning it into the barren desert that would later become known as the Anarok Desert. The Netherese were ill-prepared for this new enemy, and the devastation wrought by the Faerûns began to spread unchecked, forcing much of the population of Low Netheril to flee westward in search of safer lands. The floating enclaves of High Netheril were, for the most part, spared from the direct effects of the Faerûns' magic, but the life-drain spells created increasing tensions between the arcanists of the enclaves and the people of Low Netheril as the land withered beneath them.
It was less about the land withering and more about the arcanists losing their immortality. They weren't true immortals. They were just like living a really long time by extending their lives with magic. And the Faerûn were just like, no, we take that away from you. So Faerûn took that magic away, causing arcanists who couldn't age to age, causing them to panic. which means they would lose their positions and power. Some arcanists sought to become undead liches, and undead liches live forever as long as they feed on souls, but they do live forever, and they can be killed, but they live agelessly. And a lot of wizards in D&D, as you'll know, is a common theme with D&D, is that wizards of immense talent and power seek lichhood because they have no other means to extend their lives. They can't do it through magic, so they seek it through darker forces, aka the god in the abyss, the demon prince, well, demon lord, Orcus, the god of undeath. He created liches, and it's because of him that they could become liches. There's a couple liches that survive. Eom's one of them. Larloc's another. There's a reptile lich that exists still, but he doesn't show up very often after 2nd edition. There's quite a few liches, in fact. Vecna. Vecna's a lich, but he's not part of Netheril. He's a completely separate franchise in D&D.
Low Netheril's cities were abandoned, and the growing divide between the magical elite in the sky and the suffering people on the ground grew ever wider. While the life-draining spells of the Ferums were turning the lands of Netheril into desert, many Netheris fled to other lands, bringing with them the culture of magecraft and a hunger to recapture the glory they had lost. The devastation caused by the Ferums led to widespread unrest across Low Netheril, the loss of fertile lands, the death of crops, and the collapse of cities.
And to be very clear, Netheris indirectly were killing the Ferum's children. They did not know they were doing this. They couldn't have known. It's like a byproduct of their desire to live forever. So the arcanists that would use spells and magic to extend their life was systematically draining the magic that sustained their children before they could grow into adults. So like any angry parent, they went after the person that completely indirectly violated their child. And it's sad.
Led to civil upheaval. In negative 450 DR, large-scale migrations into the savage frontier began, with thousands fleeing the increasingly hostile conditions of Low Netheril. This mass exodus caused further destabilization in the Empire, as infrastructure that once supported Netheril's massive floating cities began to crumble. As the life-draining magic of the Ferums continued, several enclaves began constructing wards to protect themselves. In negative 427 DR, two of Netheril's floating cities, Loda and Tith Telendrothiel, fell from the sky as their mythalars. The magical devices that kept them afloat were disrupted by the Ferum's influence. The loss of these enclaves shocked them.
I think since 1958 is as far back. Let me see, because I forget, because I wasn't alive during that time. Let me see. All right, it was Gary Gygax he created. So it really started late January of 1974. Looks like the date's debated, but the first couple books were released then. This is basically first edition. And then you get second edition after that in the 80s. And then you get third edition during the 90s. Fourth edition during the early 2000s. And then 2014 fifth edition. It's old. It's very old. Its creator is Gary Gygax. There was several other people that were part of the initial process of its creation. One of the biggest names is Ed Greenwood, who actually has a YouTube channel. If you ever are interested in asking lore questions directly to the creator of Faerun, because the majority of D&D settings are all taking place in Faerun, and Ed Greenwood created the foundation for that, similar to how Tolkien created the foundation for Lord of the Rings, and George R.R. Martin with Game of Thrones. It's a lot. Dungeons & Dragons has a ton of lore. If you like lore, you like fictional lore that's deep and has a lot of consistency to it, this would be the series to get started in. D&D is a great introduction into that stuff.
Magical elite, and in response, the remaining floating cities bolstered their defenses with wards designed to repel the Ferrum's magic. However, these defenses only slowed the inevitable. As the land below turned to dust and chaos reigned in low Netheril, many of the surviving cities of high Netheril found themselves isolated, floating above a desolate wasteland. Some enclaves,
Some of it still
such as
looks green.
Alinar and Thultanthar, began preparing for even more drastic measures to ensure their survival, leading to growing internal conflicts among the magical elite. With permission from Karsus himself, Shadow published another work, this time on the demiplane of Shadow, entitled Shadows, the Palpable Cohesion of Formless Corporeality.
What the heck does that even mean?
VR, the Arcanists of Netheril made a groundbreaking
Being
discovery.
corporeal is being
The
physically
Shadow
there,
Plane,
or being able
a
to be
parallel
seen.
dimension that existed in conjunction
Formless
with the material
corporeal?
plane.
So you're just a
This
big
plane, a
floating
realm of
ball
darkness
of
and
mist?
shadow, offered a new and dangerous form of magic that the Netherese were eager to explore. The discovery of the Shadow Plane coincided with the development of shadow magic.
The shadow plane, it's a weird one for me, because Shar, who is the goddess of the shadow weave, is not responsible for the shadow realm. She's not. She has no power over it either, which is weird to me, because the one who rules the shadow realm, at least in D&D, is the Raven Queen, the Queen of Ravens, however you want to pronounce her name. She's a she's a very introverted non-god that rules over an entire plane. And basically the shadow plane is the dark side of Faerun. So if you would go anywhere in Faerun, there's always a shadow side to it.
A form of magic that drew its power not from the weave, but from the darkness of the Shadow Plane itself. Some enclaves, particularly Thultanthar, took to shadow magic with fervor. Telemont Tanthul, the ruler of Thultanthar, and his 12 sons, known as the Princes of Shade, began experimenting with shadow magic in ways that pushed the boundaries of what was considered possible.
Yes, also, during the fall of Netheril, 3 specific floating cities survived. That city that they just told us, that enclave that was experimenting with the shadow, on that side, they survived. They teleported their whole city into the shadows. And about 1,000 years later, they returned and attempted to rebuild Netheril by conquering everything around them, but that failed pretty quickly.
The inhabitants of Thultanthar became apt at manipulating shadows and illusions, and their mastery of this dark art allowed them to hide their intentions from the rest of the Empire. As shadow magic spread through the enclaves, it caused deep divisions in Netheril's Arcanists. Some believed that the use of shadow magic was dangerous, an affront to the balance of the weave that had governed magic since time immemorial. Others saw it as the next logical step in the evolution of magic, a source of untapped power that could be used to protect Netheril from the growing threat of the Faerun. Many great Arcanists were born in Netheril, and many of them outlived their own civilization by centuries, typically by lichdom. Lulam, facing the growing instability of the Empire and the constant threat of the Faerums, made the decision to embrace lichdom, an act that would grant him eternal life and allow him to continue his magical research without the constraints of mortality. Lulam's transformation into a lich shocked many of Netheril's Arcanists, but it also set a precedent. Over the following decades, several powerful Arcanists followed Lulam's path, seeking immortality through undeath. These liches retreated into the shadows, often establishing hidden layers deep within the Underdark, where they could continue their work away from the growing chaos above. The rise of lichdom further contributed to the decline of Netheril's unity, as these immortal arcanists became increasingly isolated from the rest of society. Lilam himself retreated into the North Dark, a vast network of caverns beneath Faerun, where he established a powerful magical fortress. His survival, and that of other liches, ensured that some of Netheril's great minds would continue to influence the world long after the Empire itself had fallen. Panic surged through Netheril as the citizens learned of Lulam's disappearance, and the arch-wizards that remained
Disappear just went to
feared
the
that there
Underdark.
would be a revolt.
I mean,
Karsus,
there's not a better place to
feeling the
disappear to.
responsibility for Netheril's future on his shoulders, felt that it was his duty to weld the nation back together. By negative 350 DR, the effects of the Ferum's magic had spread to nearly every corner of Netheril. Low Netheril had been almost completely abandoned, and the once great floating cities were left isolated, floating above a desolate and dying land. As civil unrest spread and the Arcanists became more desperate, the Empire teetered on the edge of collapse. Chapter 9.
Karsus's Folly. Karsus's Folly is something that was noted in Baldur's Gate 3, the video game. This was not a known title that anybody gave it. This is something that Baldur's Gate 3 created on their own, but it still follows the lore.
Karsus's Folly. At the heart of Netheril's fall was the ambition of one man, Karsus, the most powerful arcanist in Netheril's history. Karsus believed that he could save his people from the destruction wrought by the threat of the Ferums by assuming control of magic itself. His solution was an audacious one. He would become a god, seizing control of the weave by forcibly taking the divine mantle of Mistral, the goddess of magic. The resulting disaster, known as Karsus's Folly, was the single most catastrophic event in Faerun's magical history.
Okay, there's a lot of nuance to this that he doesn't go over, I believe, in this video, since this is my first time watching this guy's version of the video. So, I'll explain. Karsus, he created a 12th level spell. The 12th level spell was called Karsus's Avatar, which, when cast, would allow him to pick and choose any god of his choice and usurp that god's power for a total of what is believed to be 10 minutes. He would not become a permanent god. He would not become unilaterally a new god. He would be a temporary god state, so that way he could wipe out the Faerun and get rid of them so Netheril could survive. So, of the gods he chose Mistral, the first goddess of magic. Mistral was the one he should not have chosen, because Netheril, despite all its knowledge and research, failed to realize that when they were siphoning the weave using the device that Lolam created, the Mythalar, I always fail to pronounce it, but still my favorite artifact, the Mythalar. And because that was siphoning magic from the raw weave itself, it was causing immense damage to the weave. You see, anytime magic is used in Faerun, in the crystal sphere that they exist in, it comes directly out of the weave. And the weave in that particular location where that magic was used is damaged. It can self-repair itself. However, at the rate Netheril was utilizing the weave to create magic above 9th level, and using 10th level, 11th level, and even 12th level magic, they were damaging it a lot. So Mistral had to sever part of her own consciousness just to maintain the weave. She dedicated that piece of her consciousness to constantly maintain the weave on a 24/7 basis. She had no breaks. So, when Karsus decided to, hey, Mistral, I'm going to take your power for 10 minutes. Well, that was a mistake, because by taking her power, he ripped away her consciousness, from the part that was constantly repairing the weave. In a single moment, when Karsus pulled all that godly power into him, after casting the 12th level spell, Karsus' Avatar, the only 12th level spell in existence, he destroyed the weave because she could not maintain it anymore. So to prevent Karsus from causing any damage further to the weave, Mistral committed suicide. She killed herself. It was the only way to protect the weave and prevent it from being destroyed. Now, in about 5 minutes after Karsus had done this, and she took her own life, and Karsus' avatar, the spell he cast, where he absorbed so much godly power, he fell and shattered like stone, similar to how Majin Vegeta did a final explosion against Majin Buu, and he came out as stone. A new goddess of magic was born 5 minutes later, named Mistra. Mistra then, trying to save what was left of Netheril, because what happened is with the weave gone, the floating cities fell, and the ground came up to meet them. And it was bad. Hundreds of thousands of people died in ways you could not even begin to imagine. Imagine floating 10,000 feet in the air in a floating city, and then out of nowhere, just the sheer speed of the collapse and falling straight to the ground. It must have been heart-wrenching. But Mistra returned. She managed to save 2 of the cities that I understand. And a third city, the city that was enveloping itself with shadow magic, transported itself away before the weave collapsed on it. But Mistra did save some of the cities and safely got them to the ground without much loss to life. Because Mistra, even though she was a goddess, she cared deeply, deeply for mortal beings. Like, her love was on par with her mother, Seluna, who cared about mortal beings. See, Mistral, the first goddess of magic, was created by both Seluna and Shar, who were twin sisters, one of darkness, one of light. Selune is light, Shar is darkness. And they fought with each other during the time of creation. And in that destructive wave when they fought each other, Mistral, the goddess of magic, their daughter, was born. Mistral's the one who died during Karsus' folly. Mistra became the second goddess of magic, and still the daughter of Seluna and Shar, same person, just a different personality with different rules. And Mistra proceeded to restrict all magic of 9th level and above to not be used. You could still use 9th level magic, but at great cost. She didn't allow the use of the magic like it used to be, which allowed Netheril its free use of magic so easily. It restricted also what wizards, formerly known as arcanists, but now known as wizards, could cast in terms of spells. And the restriction on their ability to use spells required thousands of hours of study just to be able to utilize a few spells. Mistra made it harder, so she would not have to deal with repairing the weave as often as Mistral did, and to prevent a situation like Karsus from happening again. Now, if you've heard of the game Baldur's Gate 3, folks, this game adds a few things to the lore that weren't originally in the lore. And because Baldur's Gate is a canon game to Faerun, this makes these items canon. Karsus, in order to cast Karsus' Avatar, needs certain ingredients. Those were stated in the original lore. Baldur's Gate 3 states that there was 3 items that he used. The Karsite Weave, an orb, the orb that was implanted in Gale in Baldur's Gate 3. The other is the Karsite, is Karsus' wand, which he used to control the Karsite Weave. The Karsite Weave was a type of device that could absorb magic just like the Mythalar. And because of that, he created the Crown of Karsus, which was the Crown of Domination. It would allow him to dominate a god and take control of them. That's how he absorbs the power of the god with the spell Karsus' Avatar. Keep in mind, this is all added new lore. Like, we're talking about decades old lore with added stuff to it by Baldur's Gate 3. So they added things to it, but the basic lore was he cast a 12th level spell to absorb a god's power. He chose Mistral, which was his mistake, and it caused the fall of Netheril. That's what happened. Karsus's folly is what they called it in Baldur's Gate 3. In the original lore, they called it Karsus's fall.
By negative 339 DR, Netheril was already teetering on the brink of collapse. The Ferums, ancient and malevolent, had been unleashing devastating life-draining spells across low Netheril, slowly transforming the fertile lands into the wasteland that would become the Anarok Desert. Entire cities were being abandoned as farmland turned to dust and rivers dried up. The once thriving empire was rapidly losing its ability to sustain its people. The enclaves of High Netheril, suspended far above the devastation, were largely protected from the direct effects of the Ferum's magic. However, the growing civil unrest in Low Netheril, the collapse of agricultural production, and the rising tensions between the magical elite and the common folk created a volatile situation. Even within the floating cities, Arcanists struggled to devise a way to stop the Ferum's seemingly unstoppable magic. In the midst of this turmoil, Karsus, already famed for his mastery of heavy magic, became convinced that the only way to save Netheril was to seize direct control over magic itself.
I want to be clear about this. That's not entirely true. When he created Karsus's avatar, the 12th spell, originally the spell would allow him to take any god's power. It was only by him choosing Mistral that this all started. He didn't have Mistral in his thoughts at the beginning because he was thinking, what god would work best for this? What god's power could help me to defeat the Faerun? That's what he was thinking. Nowhere in the lore does it say he immediately said it was Mistral. You can make the assumption it was that. I personally just fall into the category of, hey, I've got this awesome 12th level spell. I'm going to pick one of the gods. Let's decide which one I'm going to take temporarily, because it was a temporary position. He would not become a full-fledged god, because there's no way to do that through Karsus's avatar. There's different ways to become a god, but it's restricted because of the overseer god Ao.
Karsus, like many of his
so even if he wanted to
viewed magic
become a
as a
full
tool
god,
to be mastered,
Ao could easily strike him down and prevent him from doing so.
Limitations were holding back his true potential. He theorized that if he could replace Mistral, he could reshape the weave according to his will.
Again, this is incorrect. I appreciate this guy's video. Most of what he's gone over is the tidbits that were in between the big events, which helps fill in a lot of gaps. But no, that is not what he believed. Karsus's avatar would not allow him to usurp a god fully. It would give him temporary access up to 10 minutes, and he could utilize that quick power boost to wipe out the Faerun. That was his plan. That was it. Once he did that, he would put it all aside and start all over again.
Will, protecting Netheril from both the Ferums and everything else. In a bid to enact his plan, Karsus began the creation of Karsus's avatar, the most powerful spell ever conceived by mortals. This spell was a 12th level incantation, far beyond the normal limits of magic, that would allow Karsus to usurp the godhood of Mistral by stealing her divine power. This spell required immense resources, both in terms of magical energy and physical components, which Karsus gathered with the help of his followers in his enclave. The gathering of magical power caused disturbances across the empire, but few outside of Karsus's inner circle fully understood the scope of what he intended to do. Standing at the center of Ilanar, Karsus began to draw upon all the magical forces at his disposal, weaving a spell that would reach into the divine realms and pull the very essence of Mistral from her celestial throne. The skies above Netheril darkened, and waves of magical energy cascaded across the land as Karsus's spell built into its climax. The scale of the magic being wielded was unprecedented. It shook the very fabric of reality, For a brief, fleeting moment, Karsus succeeded. He stole the divine essence of Mistral, and he became a god. In that moment, Karsus had control over the weave. However, the instant he took control, it became clear that Karsus had made a fatal miscalculation. The weave was far more complex than even the greatest mortal arcanist could comprehend. As Mistral's essence flowed into him, Karsus's mind was overwhelmed by the sheer enormity of the task. Karsus's control over magic quickly began to unravel. Without the weave's delicate balance, entire cities that relied on magical infrastructure began to fall apart. The most devastating consequence, however, was the sudden failure of the Mythalars, the enormous magical devices that kept Netheril's floating cities aloft. As the Mythalars lost their connection to the weave, the great cities of High Netheril, which had floated in the skies for centuries, began to plummet to the ground. The mighty enclaves of Netheril, centers of culture, magic, and innovation, were destroyed in mere moments. The people within the cities, unprepared for the sudden collapse, were killed in the thousands as they smashed into the earth below. The destruction was out.
As Raphael put it when he was describing the fall of Netheril, he said, "Oh, the screams as they watched and felt the ground come up to meet them." Villain talk, jeez.
Absolute, and the once proud empire of Netheril was reduced to rubble. Karsus, the greatest of Netheril's arcanists, challenged Mistral, the goddess magic, to an arcane duel for supremacy. The ensuing battle nearly destroyed the weave and caused the sky cities of the archwizards to plummet back to earth. As Karsus floundered his newfound godhood, unable to control the weave, Mistral acted quickly to prevent the complete collapse of magic across Faerun. In a selfless act, Mistral sacrificed herself in order to undo the damage that Karsus had caused. Her death broke Karsus's control over the weave, and for a brief moment, magic ceased to function altogether. This momentary void of magic was enough to halt the collapse of the weave, but it also sealed Netheril's fate. Without the magic that sustained them, the floating cities fell, and the infrastructure of Lone Netheril, already ravaged by the Faerums, collapsed. Mistral's sacrifice allowed the weave to be reformed, and she quickly reincarnated as Mistra, the new goddess of magic. However, Mistra's new weave was far more restrictive than before, preventing mortals from ever attempting to wield magic at such a grand scale again. Karsus, meanwhile, was left as a mortal once more, though drained of all his power. His body, petrified in the moment of his failure, fell into the ruins of Islenar.
Karsus's fall, a lot of people have speculation as to where his soul might have gone, because first of all, his body petrified and collapsed into a giant stone statue because of all that godly power he absorbed. And then there's the others that think that he's in the Nine Hells, somewhere being punished for his actions. I don't think that. There's actually some lore that was introduced in 2E about Karsus being wrapped up in the outer realms, in the far realm, that his soul literally ascended but then descended and fell out of existence. He basically became a being similar to what warlocks in D&D do, where they sign contracts with outer beings to gain some type of power. And among those outer gods is now Karsus, a fragment of what he used to be, but he is ambition itself.
Where it remained as a grim monument to his hubris, his spell, Karsus's avatar, would become forbidden knowledge, a page in a book, a story told, but never made real again. Without the infusion of magic, the floating cities of Netheril fell, and Karsus was instantly slain, his bloated body petrified and toppled from the high plateau above his floating city and plummeted to the earth. As his body fell, his stony eyes still shimmering with the last glint of godly omniscience, caught the glimpse of the cities of Netheril smashing to the ground, killing all their inhabitants. His heart broke. Greed for the power of the deities themselves caused the destruction of his home, his family, his friends, and his people.
His ambition.
Chapter 10: The Diaspora and Legacy of Netheril. The collapse of Netheril in negative 339 DR sent shockwaves across Faerun, both literally and figuratively. In the wake of Karsus's folly, the once mighty empire was reduced to ruin. Its floating cities crashed to the ground, and its people scattered across the realms. Yet even in the empire's death throes, the magic, knowledge, and legacy of Netheril endured. The diaspora, the scattering of the Netherese people, spread their influence far and wide, and the remnants of their great enclaves became the subject of legend, exploration, and in some cases, resurgence. The survivors of the fall of Netheril, both from the floating enclaves in Low Netheril, were forced to flee as their world crumbled around them. The magical infrastructure that had sustained their civilization was gone, and the once fertile lands of Low Netheril were all but transformed into the Anarok Desert, thanks to the continuing life-draining magic of the Faerums. Many of the Netherese survivors fled westward to the savage frontier, where they integrated with local human and barbarian tribes. Some of these refugees carried with them fragments of their magical knowledge, which influenced the development of new settlements. One of the most notable cities founded by Netherese survivors was Ilusk, later Luskan, which became a powerful city-state in the north and a hub of magical activity for centuries to come. Some Netherese settlers had already ventured south before the empire's fall. These refugees eventually founded the kingdom of Halrua, a land of magic that was deeply influenced by Netheril's traditions. Halrua became known for its powerful magic, though its rulers learned from the mistakes of their Netherese ancestors. Unlike Netheril, Halrua maintained tight control over the use of powerful magic, avoiding the hubris that had once destroyed the original empire. In the east, the survivors of Low Netheril who remained in the Anarok Desert became the Bedain, nomadic tribes that adapted to the harsh, desolate environment. Though much of their magical heritage was lost, the Bedain preserved fragments of their ancestors' culture and history through oral tradition. Their lives in the desert were a stark contrast to the grandeur of the floating cities, but the Bedain carried with them the legacy of a fallen empire. Those who followed the northern mountain passes were welcomed by the shield dwarves of Citadel Sunbar and the fair folk of Erlon. In time, the elven city of Alskelhorn was given over to the Netherese refugees, on the condition that they would help defend Erlon and forswear the use of their forebears' most dangerous arcane practices. The fall of Low Netheril was much more gradual. The Netherese slowly abandoned the heartlands of the realm and spread west, south, and east into the border areas that were once wilderness. Though the physical empire of Netheril was destroyed, its legacy endured in many ways. The magic, culture, and knowledge of the Netherese were scattered across Faerun, influencing the development of future civilizations and magical traditions. The Nether Scrolls, ancient repositories of arcane knowledge, remained one of the most coveted treasures in the world, sought by arcanists, treasure hunters, and scholars eager to unlock the secrets of the weave.
Well, they're mostly gone
The
now.
survivors of Netheril spread their culture and magic wherever they settled. These remnants of Netheril's legacy would continue to influence the course of history, shaping the future of magic and power in Faerun. The vast Anauroch Desert, once the heartland of the Netherese Empire, became a lasting monument to the Empire's fall. The desert
An empire
covered
that
the
lived
ruins
for
of Low Netheril,
3,000
and
years.
scattered remains of its floating cities lay buried beneath the shifting sands. While much of Netheril's magic was lost in the collapse, its influence continued to ripple through history. The rise and fall of Netheril became a cautionary tale for wizards, a reminder of the
Not that any of the wizards actually listened. One trope that continues in D&D to this day is that wizards with power corrupt absolute. It happens to every single one. They want more knowledge, they want more power, and then they go into lichdom and become a lich. And after that, then they go neutral evil and then proceed to get killed by an adventuring party. And then another wizard does the same thing again. It's an endless cycle with these wizards, I swear. They're just obsessed with knowledge, so much so that they want to live forever to learn everything.
dangers of overreaching ambition and the catastrophic consequences of unchecked power.
To be continued. It's because there's a Netherese that I referred to, that city that studied the shadow plane, do come back, and they orchestrate a war to try to conquer and rebuild Netheril. They mess with the shadow stuff.
Hey there everyone, if you enjoy this content, like and subscribe, and comment down below. Thanks again.